Hello viewers and welcome to Law and Business series.
Is the journey is not consistent. Those gaps are then what I come back to ask you.
You, as a person, even before you look for that money, you look at the avenues that you have.
Lawyers come in to protect what the bank or the circle or any institution now has decided to give out.
Hello viewers and welcome to Law and Business series. In this show we host experienced entrepreneurs to tell us their stories and their experiences, and hope by the end of the day or by the end of the show you would have picked one thing or two. So today I'm joined by, next to me is Lucy Gitau. She's an entrepreneur at Gikomba, and I'm sure she has many stories. I don't know whether we'll be able to cover all of them. Next is a gentleman called Collins. He's the head of business and SMEs in Stanbic Bank. Hope he's also going to leave us with some nuggets. And on further end is Allan Mzungu, who is an advocate here at MMS in the location that we're shooting. And today we're going to be talking about access to finance. So, Collins, as you've heard here, we want to talk about getting that money. Because when you talk to people always say, if only I had this amount of money, I could be able to do this. If only I had this amount of money, I could be able to do this. So I wanted to know from you, when people come to you and they say they want money, what makes you know whether you give this guy money or you not give them money, or what will you tell them if you think they don't qualify?
Thank you, John. So I'll just pick up with one correction. I think my role at the bank is enterprise banking. So when you say head of business, somebody else might think I'm taking their job. So let's look at it from a very basic example. If a friend of yours walks to you today and asks you to give him 2,000 shillings, will you just plug your hand in your pocket and give the 2,000 shillings? Probably no. You start thinking, does this guy always give me back my money when I give him? And that is even how the bank looks like, because the bank is run by people. So, and the money we lend out is also money from people. So we have to be very prudent in how we give that money. And the last piece I always say is, we don't know your story. So for us to then be able to give you money, we would like you to tell us the true story about your business. And once we believe your true story, we'll give you money for that story.
Is it just word of mouth?
So when I look at a typical entrepreneur, there's a portion of it being word of mouth. I think experience has taught us to tell which is a true story and which is not a true story. And then there also, since we are in banking, there also has to be a piece of paper where we can build that story. And still that piece of paper, you see, it's you writing that piece of paper. So I may not be able to verify whether you sat behind a table and just put items together. And that's why I call it a story. It has to flow. See, I can't come and tell you I left Nairobi and I go to Kisumu, then I came back to Nakuru, if you know the geography. It has to come from I left Nairobi, I go to Naivasha, I go to Nakuru, then I go to Kisumu. So if the journey is consistent, then it means the story is true. If the journey is not consistent, those gaps are then what I come back to ask you, why are there gaps in the story? So the critical piece for me is to look at consistency of the story.
Honesty.
100%.
Yeah. Thank you. Lucy, the other time we talked, you said you were at a point where you were looking for money. I wanted to know what options did you have at that moment? Which options did you have at the table of where you get that money, especially when you wanted to do your first importation?
I think, like what my colleague has shared, you, as a person, even before you look for that money, you look at the avenues that you have, whatever you have open for you as an individual. Because definitely, you have to evaluate. I cannot go to borrow money from a bank, which I don't bank. You understand? You cannot go to borrow money from a circle where you're not a member. So for me, I evaluated, I looked at the different options. Since I have finance background, I was able to evaluate, even looking at the interest charges, the different charges from the different providers, what would exactly suit what I'm doing. So that I don't just go for business, which will not be able to pay back. And since I didn't want to look for money just for a short term, I had to evaluate all the avenues which were there. So I had an opportunity to evaluate my circle, see what I can get through my shares, go back to my bank, check what they can give, and what charities, what would make me not qualify for what I want. Yeah.
You also said you were disappointed with the bank at that time. What happened?
The bank that I was banking with at the moment had some limitations. I had this big idea with me that I'm importing, so after importing, I'm coming to make this money, I'm going to repay like this and the other. But coming back to my bank, they had to look at my statements. Were my bank statements supporting what I wanted? No. At the moment, it wasn't supporting what I wanted. So the remit that they could give me could not tally with what I wanted. And so definitely you get disappointed because you have this big idea with you. You're thinking I'm getting a breakthrough. So in fact, let me tell you, for an entrepreneur, before you get into a business, you actually calculate your profits before you even get those profits. Yeah. So when I'm going for that big idea, we only fail because maybe one thing or the other didn't tie up. Otherwise, any entrepreneur who is in business, we always look at what is the end result. What makes us make a loss in between here are things which we never looked at. You understand?
Yeah.
So at that time, I knew this is what I wanted. I needed several millions of money, but my bank could only offer close to almost a quarter of what I needed. So at that time, I was disappointed. But thanks God, Kenya, we have so many banks so you hope around. And somebody else was ready to buy me off from that bank and could support my idea. So that's how I ended up. I got some few money from the circle, some few money from maybe even friends. There's a lot of trust that works in my line of business. So you'd get people who can trust you and tell you it's okay, we can lend you some money. And I ended up managing to import my first container.
And so Collins has just told us about having a consistent story. Do you think at that time your story wasn't consistent? And how was it with the circle? Were they not asking about the same story?
I believe what Collins is talking about, the consistency of your story. Look at it this way. I'm importing for the first time. And just like anyone else, when you're starting your business, and that's something that maybe our government should look at, when you're starting any business, you do not have history. And when you go to the bank, Collins can maybe support that or tell us otherwise. When you go to the bank, they will ask you, give us your statement, whether you're coming from their bank or any other bank. There's always that statement they will look at the flow of things. If it is a business idea, most likely they'll ask you, where are you importing from? Give us details of your supply. You understand? If it's something like for clearing, they'll ask you, give us the papers for clearance documents so that we can see whether we can pay for you. So my story was that I was starting from a point where I was not. I was not an importer and I wanted to become an importer. So for my first payment, I had not paid my supplier anything else. It's only that I have gotten a supplier, I have trusted this guy, and I'm believing that they're going to send me these goods. So when you look at my statement, I come and ask you for 4 million, and maybe my account can only support maybe 1 million. Definitely. And I don't have a pay slip. You get? So there's nothing that they can hold to say, if we give her this money, most likely, they will work on the risk. What are the likelihood of us losing this money? Or how will she? Because the moment I did my first container, moving forward, it was a smooth sale. Because now they have gotten the information. They have seen these are potential clients. Yeah.
Thank you. Coming to you, Alan, we talked a bit earlier. You said you had a client and wanted a loan, and from what I've heard from Lucy is that it's like a straightforward. You go to the bank, or you go to a circle, you go to your friends. What circumstances were there for somebody to come to you as a lawyer to help you to get a loan?
All right, thank you. So, lawyers are not involved in the process of getting a loan. Lawyers come in to protect what the bank or the circle or any institution now has decided to give out. You start, I think, as an entrepreneur, you start from the time you registered. If you're an entity, if you're a company, you start from the time you registered to prepare for when you want to ask the bank for money, and then what the bank will ask you in securing that money. So what we normally advise is people who are getting into lines of business where they would like to get financing at some point, they need to be set up properly. If you are going to be in business, form an entity, register a company, a limited liability partnership, a business name, anything which is outside of yourself as an individual. Because Collins may speak about it later. As an individual, the options for financing are limited. You might only be able to get salary advance or some small personal loans for your assets or maybe a home. But for business, you need to set yourself up properly. So we advise businesses when they're starting to register an entity which supports their dreams. So if you're going to be a big importer, like my colleague said, you start with a company, you keep your accounts and your books well kept. Now that's not a lawyer's job, but a lawyer is to make sure your entity stays neat, stays well kept for you to be able to submit the documents required when you're applying for a loan. So for example, if you want to apply for a loan as an entrepreneur, you'll be asked to produce certain documents. Your certificate of registration as a company, your constitutive documents. These are the documents you sign when you go to register your company. You'll also be asked to produce your tax, your KRA PIN. You'll be asked to produce your tax compliance certificates. And maybe if you have assets, they'll also ask you to produce, if it's a car, a logbook, if it's a land, a title deed. Now lawyers come in to make sure all these things are neat. At the time you're acquiring your assets, then you don't acquire it in your own individual name. You acquire it in the name of the company. So that when you look to get financing, then the company can be supported by the asset it has acquired. If you're looking also to get financing later, your payments come through that account for the entity you've registered. And hopefully in the same bank, then you'll get support. I'll give the example of MMS. Our bankers support us very well because we've registered an entity which is an LLP. Now, when we needed support to expand our farm from one location to two, because we're in Nairobi and Mombasa, the bank was able to look at the options that were available to us as an entity at the time, and what we got then was an overdraft, which wasn't much, but it was able to get us from point A to B in terms of our expansion. And once we made our expansion and our continued business with the bank, we were able to get other things which they call automatic loans, which every so often you get pre-qualified for and you're able to access and pay back. Now I'll give you a story which we also normally interact with borrowers, because as lawyers we represent banks and financial institutions, circles and what have you. So for instance, John will come to me and you've gone to a circle and your circle has approved your loan. They tell you will give you a certain amount, 100,000, but you support it with your logbook. And you've taken it to the circle, they've looked at it and say, yes, the valuation is proper, you're ready for a facility. Go to a lawyer, they'll do the documents. Now, you come to our office and you have your logbook, and I look at the logbook, I look at your ID, is two different persons. And then you tell me the car belongs to your brother. So your brother is the one who's securing your financing. And your brother now, I tell you, your brother has to come to send the documents as the person securing your financing. So then your brother may not have been aware when they give you the logbook that it will have to be taken through a legal process. They thought you would just take it to the bank and the bank puts it in a certain safe somewhere and they give you money. So your brother comes, you explain to your brother, maybe they understand and they allow you to proceed with the transaction. They sign and you are ready to get your money from the bank, or they don't understand and they say, no, I can't allow you to do this to my logbook. And so you start from scratch. So it's always good to consult with lawyers, even as you prepare to go seek financing, especially if you're operating a business which will require regular financing, so that we can prepare you in terms of the process you need to take at the bank, the documents you need to have available, and the documents what's available, what's the process after before you get the money. Because from the time you approach colleagues at the bank, the time you come to the lawyer, depending on whichever, maybe not colleagues, whichever financial institution, it could be a day to process your application and give you money, or it could be weeks or months, depending on the amount of money you're asking for, whether there's required security. And when you come to us now, as lawyers for the bank, and you have security, depending on whether it's a car, which you have a logbook, or it's land, which is in some registry somewhere, and you need to draft documents and secure it, then it could take weeks, it could take longer, depending on the challenges you have with your security. So we always help our clients to prepare for the financing they need to apply for. And when they do get financing, sometimes we also ask for the borrower themselves to prepare the documents to make sure we liaise with the bank's lawyer to get that process smoothly done.
So, okay, I don't know when, because what I'm used to when, let's say you're taking a loan, just shown a dotted line to sign or something, and we never get the chance to read it. Are you saying that maybe we should like give a lawyer to go through it? And is there a possibility, or in your experience, has there been a case whereby things have been changed in the contract?
So as a rule of thumb, in any business you do, you must always read your documents, not just when you're borrowing money, but in any undertaking your links to your business or to even your personal life. So it is important that if you have the time and the know-how, that you go through the document yourself and you make sure it covers you properly. If you don't have the know-how, and most ordinary persons will not have, then you come to us lawyers and we help you review from your offer letter, because once you apply to the bank and you're successful, the bank will give you an offer letter. The offer letter will tell you that we have evaluated your application, we are ready to give you this much money. On these terms, how long it will take you for what installments you will pay, how much, and more important, what security you give. Now, for banks, it's more straightforward because the list for you, you'll already have provided your copies of title, copies of logbook, and what have you. SACCOs might be a bit tricky. So a SACCO, you might be told, go find 3 guarantors according to your constitution. So you run around, find whoever is friendly or looks like they can be approached, and they guarantee you. And you do the same for them. For guarantors, that is risky because there is more cases of guarantors having to pay for borrowers where borrowers fail to pay. So then you see there is a role for, at every step, you seeking consultation and legal advice on anything you're signing. Whether you are guaranteeing a loan for someone, whether you're yourself borrowing from an institution, or whether you're providing security for someone who's borrowing.
Okay, let's go back to that young man somewhere out there maybe listening, and say wants to start selling shoes. He has no idea where to start, like where to borrow money and everything. Lucy, you've given an example of how you got help from family friends, or maybe family members, and also the circle. So for that young man, and this is a question I would also want you, Collins, to answer, because maybe you've encountered such people. When they come to you and they say, I want to do this, what do you usually tell them? Or what kind of conversation do you have with them?
I think one of the biggest challenge with our country is that one, people fear banks. I start to be corrected by colleagues on this. If you find a young man having the courage to walk into a bank and borrow loan, it's very hard. I also think part of our culture has affected borrowing. You find people talking so negatively about how they took a loan from the bank and through that loan they went down. Yeah? But for me, coming from an entrepreneurship and having worked with the bank, I would clearly advocate and say it's one of the safest way to do your business. Because one, you get disciplined and all that. But to our young generation, one may have an avenue of how to go and borrow the money. They have this syndrome of we are not sure, we don't know whether we can get this and all that, yeah? Because maybe somebody is even looking for something like 10,000, 20,000, but that person would rather go to Furiza than go to the bank. Yet, the bank will even charge a very small fee, yeah? So I feel a lot of education requires to be done, or maybe the banks requires to be more aggressive, especially on dealing on startups. They are very risky, but you can, out of 10, you cannot rank 3 or 4 who can talk of success. Yeah. So when we are in the Juakari sector, most of the time we find people deal with trust. Someone will walk into my shop, I'll sell to them a bill today. Tomorrow they will come with maybe with half of the money. I will trust them that they will go and sell and bring me the money. See, now me, I'm setting them up for their capital. Yeah? And within no time, you find this person is able to even bank a lot of money. Yeah? But so, that's starting off. Even somebody who is in the village, there are many people who have ideas, but the only thing that they think is, I can only get my money from maybe my mother, my father, you understand, yeah? So the moment people leave campus or maybe colleges or maybe they cleared Form 4 and they would like to venture into businesses, the biggest challenge is always that first going to start up your business.
So from where you have described is that at that moment you are like the one giving them the loan.
Yeah, if I give you a bill today to go and sell, I have like given you a loan which has no interest. Because if I was selling at 10,000 and you brought me maybe 5,000, and through trust I have agreed, go with it, go sell, bring me back my money at this particular time, I have enabled you to go and make that extra coin. You will come and pay me today. Tomorrow, maybe you will come and be able to pay a full bill. After 2-3 days, that 1,000 you're making out of one bill, you will come and pick 2. Yeah? In a span of a month or 2, you find that person has grown. That way, it is not formal education you have done, but you have assisted somebody. Question is, how many of them would like to start a business and are able to access, or to even come to us, or even go to the bank, or even go to the circle? Maybe our education does not capture so much in terms of entrepreneurship. Yeah. For me, I usually feel maybe from the secondary school level, children should be taught where to get money, how to save. Yeah. Because you find many people, I can tell you because we deal with them every day. There are those who you can give, there are those you will not even attempt to give. Yeah. And maybe you just made a physical judgment. Yeah?
Yeah.
And looking at our banks again, do they have any security? Like we keep on hearing there is a youth fund. How many people give the right story? How many people access that fund? Where do they access it from? Yeah? Or is it put in the banks, then we come to the banks and borrow? Are they that accessible? Because for me, I usually feel if there's youth fund, give it to all the banks. Let me decide whether I'm walking into Stanbic or to wherever or to whichever bank. Then let this bank make a decision. So that at least that startup capital, let me tell you, I usually tell people there's somebody who can even start their business with zero. There's another one who will give a story of how I started with 100 million. The two of them have only two ways, either to make it or break it. Yeah? There's somebody who start with zero and make it to 100. There's somebody who start with 100 million and drop. Yeah? So accessing the funds is something like maybe Collins can tell us. What do they do exactly?
From Collins, very shortly before we go for break, I just wanted to know what kind of conversation do you have with these young people, maybe for the first time, they are thinking of ways to get money and then they have come to you. When you have met that young man, you don't want to discourage that person. What kind of conversation do you have with such a person?
A Stanbic Bank, where dealers said we focus on three aspects with SMEs.
So the legal framework, I think, in terms of the financial sector, especially the retail access to finances, might have gaps.
You make a mistake today, you wake up. You learn from it, you move on.